Do whatever you want.
Oh.
Shares out to here. All very good.
Thank you so much.
That's you.
Been a minute.
Waiting for the horse. Oh, that's right. Yep.
All right, it's 5 o'clock, so let's get started. The recording on. All right, welcome everyone to the February 21st Fish and Wildlife Board meeting. My name is Michael Bancroft. I'm the Orange County Board member. I am acting chair while Brad Furland is away, but he is joining us online. So before we get started, we have two things I want to go over first. So in regards to the agenda, we will be removing item 7, the presentation on wildlife rehab in Vermont. It will be pushed to a future meeting. So before we get started, let's go around and board members, please introduce yourself. Paul, we'll start with you.
Paul Noel, Orleans County. Neil Hogan, Bennington County.
Brian Bailey, Washington County.
Bob Patterson, Addison County.
Mike Bancroft, Orange County.
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
Nick Burnham, Windsor County. Michael Colson, and Essex County.
And Brian McCarthy online, we'll start with you.
Brian McCarthy from Grand Isle County.
Brad Furlan, Caledonia County.
Jay Sweeney, Franklin County.
David Dean, Wyndham County.
And the board members online. Okay. I'll hand it over to the commissioner. If you'd like to introduce yourself and department staff.
Thank you. I'm Chris Herrick. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have a fair number of people in the room. I think we'll start with Major Fowler, and you can introduce or have the wardens introduce themselves, and then start with Abigail and come around the room.
Sean Fowler, I'm the major for the warden service, and the 3 other gentlemen are from the Northwest. Well, Lieutenant Courier, introduce them.
I'm Robert Courier. I'm the lieutenant for the Northwest Supervisory District.
Jeremy Schmidt, I'm the Underhill warden.
Ethan Coffey, I'm the Hyde Park warden.
Assistant Commissioner.
John Austin, Director of Wildlife.
David Solomsville, Fish and Wildlife Program Manager.
Nick Morton here and was project leader. Peter Malcolm, Fire Denver project leader.
And anyone from the department joining us online? Catherine?
Hello.
There we go.
Harry. Is that everyone?
We have Allie Thomas and John.
Okay, thank you. And as a reminder, housekeeping item, folks from the public, if you are joining us online, please turn off your camera so that we can only see board members and department staff. As well as if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. And folks here in the room, we do have microphones here that are recording, and it does pick up side chatter. So thank you, everyone. Okay, so first item on the agenda, approval of previous meeting minutes from the January 17th, 2024 meeting. Hopefully all board members received the email and were able to review the minutes.
I still move to accept those minutes. As printed.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Got it.
Mike? I just got a text from Allison Frazier, who's trying to get in the building and the doors appear to be locked. So I don't know if
Okay.
I don't know if anybody can open those doors, unlock the doors for her.
Yep, thank you. We're on it. All
And,
right, so
Mr. Chairman, the camera is showing only the right half of the room. There we go. Thank you. That allows me to see virtually everybody. Thank you.
last summer. Perfect. All right. So moving on, public comments. So this is a working department meeting, but we do like to hear from the public. So we give up to 2 minutes for folks to talk about anything or related. You can ask a question, but it's not a back and forth with the department or the board. If you do have a question that needs to be answered, feel free to catch someone from the department after the meeting or send an email to your board member or someone from the department, and they will have a response shortly. So we're going to start here in the room first. Can someone, can you grab that list for me, please? Speaker list. So we'll start here in the room first with folks who want to speak. If you'd like to speak, please stand up front here. The camera will be on your back, but at least you can, I guess, address the folks in the room. You'll have up to 2 minutes, and we will be timing you. Once 2 minutes hit, we'll ask you to please wrap it up so that we can move on to anyone else who would like to speak. When you do stand up, please state your name and your town of residence. After we catch everyone in the room, we'll then move online. So folks online, please use the raise your hand function if you'd like to speak, and we'll call on you when the time comes. So first I'll go up the list and then I'll see if anyone else who didn't sign up wants to speak. So first we'll start with Justin Lindholm.
Hi, I'm Justin Lindholm from Mendon, Vermont. I am a former board member from Rutland County. I've got a few things to say about this proposed bill to change the Fish and Wildlife Board. This is the most democratic form of government I've ever been involved with, the board. It started off with 7 members, not democratic enough, so they made it 14, 1 to each county. Now the proposal is to knock it back to 12. Not democratic, for starters. And the other thing that happens is, why doesn't the legislature say, okay, only 14 or 12 of the 14 counties will be represented in the legislature every 2 years? And we'll pick another 12 counties. Very undemocratic. So that's one piece that's very undemocratic. The other thing is, hunters, this board was started because hunters have always been unrepresented in the legislature. Now, the legislature can overrule any of the rules you folks do here anyway. You can see they did that with hunting rules back when the doe hunting business was going on. They overruled. So they don't need to take over this thing and control it themselves. They already can make a law if they don't like some of your rules. So what gives here? I don't understand that part. The purpose that I think they're doing is to insulate themselves by putting members in here that they approve of, so the members can take all the blame for any bad rules that come out. They should come out with law. If they don't like some of the rules here, come on, let's see a law from the legislature. That's my 2 cents. And the other thing I wanted to say is I am not too happy with using drones to go after wounded deer. Now, how are they going to tell the difference between a wounded deer and one out there and whatever, because these wounded deer can take off a mile. You're gonna be tracking down all kinds of deer with a drone. I would have strict rules on it if they're gonna do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is unusual. Because the legislature dropped a new version of the bill this morning, you probably haven't had time to see it. They've raised the number to 15 board members, not 12.
Oh, nice.
Just saying, just for accuracy's sake.
All right, David?
David Lasky, I'm representing the Hunt of a Lifetime, and I'm here to follow with the proposal to let the special opportunity tags hunt during the rut. So I'm here to either answer questions or gain information, whatever we're going to get out of this meeting. Okay. Thank you.
Rod?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rob Coronado. I'm from the town of Orange. I'm also the director of Vermont Wildlife Patrol. I am here to speak on behalf of or in support of Senate Bill 258. Largely because I think that I've been here for a year. I've been coming to these meetings. I've been giving what I think is informed, intelligent testimony on issues, sometimes non-game, sometimes game. And a big concern of mine is the hyper focus that the department seems to have on big game species and fur bearers. I heard a lot today and in past testimony on S258 that all wildlife, all game species are flourishing and abundant in Vermont. I don't think that's true. We got Canada lynx are not fully recovered. Cougars have not been recovered. Gray wolves. We can go into caribou and other extirpated species too. Marten are still in a serious shape, and even fisher populations are down because of rodenticide poisoning. And I was looking at all the take for the last 10 years, and it has consistently been a decreased number of fishers. As far as why I believe board reform is necessary is, for a small example, I've been coming to these meetings, as I stated, over a year, and I have yet to have one conversation with Mr. Bancroft, my representative. I haven't seen anybody else in Orange County here at these meetings. That begs the question is, who are you representing from Orange County? I would like to know why my voice is not being heard. I've also been hearing a lot of comparisons with hunting and trapping practices to cultural heritage. I heard the term cultural genocide thrown out yesterday is what this bill would do. And I just want to say, as an Indigenous person, that I find that highly offensive. My people were persecuted, imprisoned, and killed because of our Indigenousness, because we believe in a different worldview. I do not think, in my humble opinion, that hunters and trappers should be comparing themselves to Native Americans. Other than that, I just want to say that I do not want to be seen as an enemy of the department. I do not want to be seen as opposing the very good work. I support the position of the department with the drones. I think that it's a slippery slope. I feel like they've been giving it a lot of good thought. I was really pleased to quickly review that. So I would just like to say thank you for the time, and I hope that the next two appointments of members of the board, 2 terms expired. Let's see who they are. Let's see if there's anything a little bit different than the past. Thank you.
Thank you. No one else marked yes. Anyone else in the room who'd like to speak who wasn't on the list? All right, moving online. So folks, again, please use the raise your hand function and we will call on you to speak. So first up, looks like Brian O'Gorman. You have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
You can hear me. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I hope. I don't actually live in Vermont, but I'm a businessman in Vermont. I have a tree farm down in Bennington County. And I'd like to speak one more time, as I have several times before, on the setbacks for setting traps. And I have a mile along 43rd Infantry Division Memorial Highway with a speed limit something like 50 miles an hour. And I think no one but a darn fool would be walking their dog there on my property near the highway. I'd like you to reconsider those setbacks It's eminent domain, taking my land by eminent domain without really bringing me to eminent domain court or whatever they do. So I'd like you to reconsider, please, yet again. I don't want to do a civil disobedience thing, but it's getting to that point. I pay taxes on that land. And I don't, if the state wants to take it as a setback for trapping, bring me to court for eminent domain, please. Next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the coyote hounding permit. I found it very, very difficult to do because it asked me what town I resided in Vermont, and I don't. And I understand maybe someone can answer this question, that there's only 38 permits given in all of Vermont this year to get those coyote hounding permits. If that's incorrect, please correct me. And lastly, I'd like you folks to oppose 258. So thank you for listening to me, people. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Brian? Anyone else online? All right, thank you, everyone. So moving on, item number 3, petition regarding youth hunt of a lifetime for moose. So I'll hand it over to the commissioner.
Don't need me.
All right. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name before.
David Lasky.
So if you like, you have 10 minutes to present your petition and for some back and forth questions.
Basically, with Hunt of a Lifetime, we work with the special opportunity tags the state has 3 of them. And we have a lot of children with mobility issues. This year we got one that's lined up in a wheelchair. So a lot of times with moose, it's very difficult to get them to cover the ground they need to be successful or to have that moose hunting experience. Whereas we think during the rut, when the moose is more callable, more vocal, it would add to their experience and it would give them a better opportunity to see moose and perhaps get a chance at one, get a good shot at one. So that was the proposal that we're working on, is to allow use of those 3 tags to use a firearm during the rut. When the rut usually coincides with the archery shoot. That's where there's a bit of difficulty with the logistics of it. And I believe it's more wording and how it's written, or is any questions for those?
Those 3 special opportunity permits, are those all, they always of a lifetime?
No, well, they have been, because Hunt of a Lifetime has been an organization that has applied for it. And it is now, any organization that represents that needs a special opportunity, and if the 503C, we can apply for that badge.
Many typically apply every year, but just one? How many Hunt of a Lifetime?
There's 3.
There's 3, but how many are actually used every year? All 3?
All 3.
And they're all Hunt of a Lifetime?
They have been.
They have them.
Yes. Got a list. Pretty good list of kids.
People reading this?
They send kids hunts all over the US, Canada. They did close to 56 hunts last year.
So you're finding that when the kids arrive, they're not, since they do have potentially life-threatening illnesses, they struggle with their ability to do the hiking, and
some of them do. Some of them get around okay. Some of them are just worn down from their treatment. Some of them are just paralyzed, basically, they're handicapped. We had some that were walking cane, we had some that were wheelchairs. relatively new. I'm going into my third year doing this. So I haven't seen as many as some of the other people have, but I do know that we have somebody that's got spinal bifida. And
Brad, any questions?
Yeah, just to, I mean, I've heard of this process before. And, but what I don't know is what has been the success rate of the individuals who have participated in the hunt of a lifetime. And I don't know, you know, the success rate is defined differently, I'm sure, by each person who participates. And I think somebody just having the opportunity to go moose hunting is a once of a lifetime opportunity, probably for a lot of people, on whether or not they are able to harvest a moose or not. And I'm just curious, are a lot of these, are they younger people, or are they older individuals, you know, people that have hunted before or people that have never hunted before? Just trying to get a sense of who actually participates in this process.
they have to be under the age of 21, or at least have signed up for it before they're 21. We've had one. It is the logistics of the birthday, I guess. Most of them, or a lot of them, are anywhere from 12 to 21. The success rate has been, on the average of about 2 hunters. 3 have been successful at harvesting a moose. Last year we had, or first year I took it over, we had 0 moose harvested. Last year we had 2 out of the 3 ships harvested moose. Some of the things that they're faced with is they're not familiar with getting a firearm on an animal that's not feeding in a food plot or setting still for them. So that's one of their challenges, as well as the mobility issue, being strong enough to hold firearm.
Thank you.
So, to the department, the logistics of the current breed and how that would apply to the petition. And what changes we have to discuss if we want to implement this. That out to everybody. How is the current wording? Is it something we can do it forward?
Oh, is the question, you're asking, is it a board authority or is it a legislative? I believe it falls under the office. Question I would like to ask, and I don't know the answer to this. When would we need to have a decision if it was in the affirmative? When would we have to have this decision made to be able to publish it?
With the way the petitions go, we'll accept it at this point.
Correct.
And next meeting would be April for recommendation. And really seriously be looking at 20. Process.
And that's what I wanted to make clear, that this isn't going to happen.
Yeah. Maybe be able to, yeah. Right.
So that will give us time. Catherine?
Yes, so I believe the petitioner is right when they say that this is a board rule. So we would have to go through the rulemaking process. And, you know, that usually takes about 6 to 8 months, as you all know. Unless Elcar wants to object, then it might take longer.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with a question, I guess, for Nick, or for any of the department to answer. Are there any drawbacks or risks that you can think of or comment on with allowing this to go forward if we went through the rulemaking process in terms of allowing a moose to be taken during archery season with a firearm?
From a moose management perspective, no. Like David said, they're pretty much 2 out of 3 now. Success rate, I doubt that's gonna really even in archery season just because of the limitations. Not gonna change them for consider taking. I think we'd have to look at some things. Reality now is most, if not all, of our auction winners also electron in the archery season. If we had these 300s as well, we may have to consider pulling back some of the other archery permits the regular season. But that's it. That's what.
Thank you.
Brad?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I just didn't hear this. I'm having a little difficult time understanding the conversations coming from the side. But I'm trying to understand why we have to open the rule and do rulemaking, and why this is different than changing the muzzleloader season and moving the antlerless muzzleloader season forward and backwards, however we feel we need, whatever we feel we need to do. And so I'm trying to get a sense of why this is different. If we're just really trying to move those 3 permits to a different time of the year and not changing anything else other than the dates that they really apply to.
Yeah.
So if you look at the rule says archery season occurs, let's see, it's open for 7 consecutive days, beginning on the first day of October, and that's under 4.1 of 10 VSA Appendix 33. It also says that only archery can be used to take. The first season, moose season, shall be by archery only. And so I think what the petitioner is asking for is that this group of folks be able to take moose by other means. And because the rule specifically has a prohibition in it, I think we would have to open the rule
Okay, so
to make that exception. So
that
it really,
makes sense.
it really revolves around what the plain language of the rule is.
Okay, that makes sense. So then I guess my question to the petitioner would be if he was aware of that and whether or not, and I don't know if it makes sense from the department's perspective either, is to move the date for those hunts of a lifetime either just before or just after archery season, so that we could do this ourselves and not have to go through the rulemaking process, but still achieve the objective of the petition. Because I think there's general support for what the petitioner is asking for, but maybe I'm wrong. But it seems like everybody supports that program, and it's just really getting the applicants or the successful applicants a better shot, a better chance at success in their endeavor.
David, let's say what Catherine stated is the rule says that the archery has to occur 7 consecutive days starting the first day of October. So that limits you with that bracket at this point.
I think to Brad's point, setting a new season dates for them, even if it was before or after the archery, creating a new season.
Correct. If those 3 permits could be filled outside of the archery season, either before or just after.
I don't think you heard me.
Brad, just so you could maybe hear me better, that would essentially be creating a new moose season. It would still require a rule change.
Okay, got it.
Can I make a suggestion? We're not going to resolve this tonight. I would suggest that the board move to relegate petition to the department to come back with what the options are and what it would entail. We'll then have the board have a discussion, including all these other things and what it means. We can take the time that we need to review all that and bring you maybe amendment.
So before we get to that, any board members have any other questions for David?
Do most of the, or all of the Hunt of Lifetime people hunt the gun season?
That's what they have.
They have it.
I just, even with crossbows, I think they'd be a little cumbersome. Most of them be able to handle. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
If there's no further discussion, I'd like to make a motion to ask the department to examine the petition that was on the table today and come back to the board with a recommendation on how to proceed.
Discussion?
Second one's right there. Yeah.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? You guys have it. So as far as a timeline goes, department, what can we expect?
Well, because we're not gonna happen this fall. It's gonna be, we'll be back within what, 2 months, David?
Our next meeting will be the first week of April. During March, we're gonna have 5 public meetings to run through. So it's not gonna be a lot of movement in March on this.
April or May.
Okay.
Probably late. We have a second meeting in April. Yeah, but maybe the last week of April.
Okay, and whenever the board looks to the department for some more guidance on a petition, the department reaches out to the petitioner with updates on where it stands, correct?
Presence is needed, just feel free to call.
Sure. Where to get you?
Mike,
Okay.
Mike, can I just make a comment? I don't know if this is an appropriate comment or not, but I would ask the department, I know there's a busy schedule in March with all the meetings, setting up those meetings, but I think it's very clear that this board, as constituted tonight, is in support of this request. And to the extent that you can present us what your recommendations are as soon as possible, that we as a board, as we stand tonight, can act on those recommendations before, depending on the outcome of S-258, before we either, survive or don't survive as a board. But I think this board here is passionate about this request and supports this request. So if we could have the opportunity to respond to the options, I would appreciate a quicker return than not.
Brian? You're muted. Brian, you're muted. Brian, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Brad, I think you're being a little hasty in suggesting that the entire board is in support of this bill. And I would like to speak against it. I don't think it's a good idea to mold the seasons differently. And a hunt of a lifetime is an opportunity that is a great thing to give somebody, but I don't think teeing them up with a sure thing harvest is what the intent of this is.
We'll take it. Thank you, Brian. All right. Item number 4, department recommendation on petition regarding the use of thermal drones to assist the locating of injured game. Right.
I'd like to introduce David Sosno.
I was just going to read through the summary of the issue and then the department recommendation. Have a chance to look at that. But on August 17th of 2023, Josh Ainsworth petitioned the department to pass a regulation that will allow the use of thermal drones to assist with the recovery of the wounded game. Yes, it only authorize FAA Part 107 UAS commercial drone pilots to complete this work under Title 10 of 20. And the recommendation of the department is that the board not enact the regulation of the use of the thermal drones in the aid of recovery of wounded game. As we have in here, the proposal is well intentioned and could increase the recovery rate of wounded game animals, but the technology also presents significant concerns from a law enforcement perspective and also the ethical hunting perspective. And while the department generally supports new methods of recovering game and improve recovery efforts, the enforcement ethics concerns outweigh the benefits at this time. General recommendation on that one. And on the second page, on page 3, we listed out some different other information to consider while you're thinking about this, responses. And one of the main issues too to think about is that it's not affecting the fate of the animals, it's affecting the recovery rates of these animals. But it will not have a benefit for the population. As I said, we can answer any questions that you have.
Did folks online hear all that?
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion regarding?
I did a little research on this. I talked to some of the hounders we have in Vermont, and one person said, I think if we allowed this, the recovery rate would go up a little bit because there's times when they don't recover the animal, but perhaps you could if you had a drone. There's a substantial financial layout of like $20,000 because it's thermal imaging. So in Ohio, I spoke to Ohio, and they've had very few problems with it, but the minimum charge is $450. If they find the animal, there's another $100 added to it. So, you know, how many people in Vermont are going to spend $550 to recover that deer? Person from Ohio said you'd be surprised, but you know, but in Ohio, there's a lot of very large antler deer that somebody might want to spend the time and effort on, where I'm not confident that it would be that way here in Vermont. So my feeling is what David has just expressed. That would be my thought. But I think there's going to be a time and a place for it, but I don't think we're ready for it yet.
You carry thermals now, like small thermals? Fire drones?
I know we can use thermal sights, but I don't think you can't use a thermal drone. I'm gonna let the wardens answer this, but you can't use a drone, period.
Yeah.
It's a sticky situation with the thermal drones because the thermal is okay, but some of the other stuff does cast in artificial light, whether it's visible to the naked eye or not. So technically it would be illegal to use an imaging device that would cast like an infrared type light, because that's still casting a light. It's an artificial light. And it's the way that the statute is written, an artificial light is illegal to use. So, I mean, a standalone, like a FLIR or something like that, there's nothing against that.
I guess I'd just like to speak in agreement with what Bob said, and I appreciate the department looking into this. I think this is very good for us to be aware of. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think it's really difficult from an ethics standpoint. There's a lot of aviation technology licensing enforcement questions that I think would be quite challenging. And I questioned whether we as a board have the authority at this time and place to make a decision that's different from methods of deer recovery that we currently have. So I kind of landed in the same place where I feel like this was a good education. I really appreciate what the petitioner brought. But I agree. I don't think this is for now.
Brad?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
I also agree, but what was spoken before in the department's recommendation. I did have a thought about these, though, if they could be used for these thermal drones to be used for moose survey, moose population surveys. I believe the petitioner said they could be programmed, do grid searches. You could do Essex County in probably a matter of days.
No, so, to answer the question quickly, they can be used. New Hampshire actually has a research project right now looking at potentially using thermal drones to locate moose. You can only search a very small area. You have to do it in the winter. Battery life is very limited on those drones when it's headed. So no, I mean, is it potentially something I would use in the future? Maybe. But it's not quite there yet. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting technology and an interesting potential tool.
I'll just say I echo what everyone has said, that it's well intentioned, definitely started the conversation, but I think more has to be done to look at this, and if it comes to the point where they do allow thermal drones to as a recovery option, that it's well thought out. So what we'll be looking for tonight is a motion on whether to accept or deny the petition. So do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to follow the department's recommendation and deny the use of thermal drone for animal recovery.
Second, Dean, Wyndham County.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Oppose? Nay. Opposed. All right. Thank you, Department. And once again, you'll reach out to the petitioner. Oh, sorry. Well, as you see, we chose to deny the petition, but thank you again. It was a very good presentation. And like I said, definitely started the conversation.
I apologize. I didn't put my name on the list. I didn't know if I was going to be asked questions. I was open maybe 2 minutes.
Catch us while we're eating or after the meeting. All right, thank you. Okay. Moving on to the 2024 Migratory Game Bird Season Preview, preliminary approval. Hand it over to you, Commissioner.
Okay. So are you going to introduce the topic and the speaker, or?
Unless you would like to, Commissioner.
Well, I think you need to start taking on a role as wildlife director. But before you do, I will say I had Abigail and I went out a few weeks ago with Andrew, and we were banding ducks, and it was a good experience. And I was impressed by the knowledge that he brings and the staff that we're working with him bring to this area. So I hear this report, realize all the knowledge that's behind it. So with that, John, go ahead.
Well, Commissioner, I appreciate that. Just to say, we're very fortunate to have you in Boughton as our waterfowl project leader. Andrew's relatively new to the Department of the Wildlife Division. Joined us maybe a year and a half ago. We're fortunate to have him from North Dakota, although he's originally a Vermonter. Grew up, I believe, around the Ferrisburg area, and is dyed-in-the-wool waterfowl hunter. So appreciate that. Andrew's going to present the 2024 waterfowl season recommendations to you tonight. They're generally relatively straightforward, similar to what you've seen in the past. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, tonight I'm going to go through a little bit of what we've been doing recently with the Migratory Game Birds program, and then I'll get into surveys, and then I'll go into our recommendations for the seasons 2024. So eastern mallards have been on the decline recently. The last 20 years or so, they've been declining about 1% per year. in the Northeast especially, but across the US. And so there's been a lot of questions about why this decline is happening. So that is, so these numbers come from multiple different breeding surveys that are conducted within the eastern US. So the Atlantic Flyway is highlighted in black. There's the Eastern Survey area, which is all Eastern Canada and Maine. And then there's the Atlantic Flyway Breed Waterfowl Survey, which runs from New Hampshire to Virginia. And through these surveys, that is how they have determined there has been a decline in mallards. Within the last 10 years, we went from a mallard-centric model to a species, a set of species to base harvest strategies on. Because mallards were representative of the Atlantic Flyway. They're not really native to the Atlantic Flyway. So basing our harvest programs on mallards is not necessarily a good strategy. 2022 breeding population of mallards was 1.2 million, which is up a little bit from 2021. I didn't get the 2023 numbers in here, but I believe they declined again. But this increase was enough of an increase to increase the mallard limit back to 4. It had been at 2 for 3 years of the test phase. And with that increase, it was enough to trigger the threshold to go back up to 4. So the Eastern Mallard Research Collaborative was established. It's made up of 22 collaborating agencies and with plans to mark 1,200 female mallards over 4 years. It started back in 2022, I believe. Vermont has been a participant. Overall, those 22 agencies have in 2023 put out over 610 transmitters and over 400 geolocators. So these are the 22 some of the 22 collaborating agencies. So it's stretched all the way from Maine, Canada, down to, I believe, South Carolina. It's the furthest south state that are putting transmitters on mallards. There's also states in the Midwest, in the Central Flyway and Mississippi Flyways that are also putting transmitters out that are different project, but all this information together gives us a really good idea of what is going on. Or the hope is that it will give us a really good idea of what is going on. So in Vermont in 2022, we put out 8 transmitters. 2023, last year we put out 13 transmitters and 16 geolocators. In 2024 so far, we have deployed 1 transmitter and 6 geolocators, and we have another 11 geolocators yet to deploy. We'll hopefully be trying to put out some, and 2 more transmitters as well. So some of the objectives of the study are to understand breeding, survival, and habitat use of eastern mallards, quantify and compare female mallard movements throughout the year, understand movement and timing as it relates to migration surveys. So we have a better idea of where the birds are when we're surveying. If they're not in the survey areas when we're surveying, that will give us not great data. Assess competition between black ducks and mallards. There's also a black duck project going on in the Atlantic Flyway. Understand brood fate and identify priority habitats. Where are these mallards going? What areas are these most? How can we then conserve those areas to help? So this is a short little clip showing some of the data that we can get from these transmitters, showing mallard movements throughout the fall of 2023. Actually, this is the fall of 2022. Early winter.
Andrew, are each one of those lines one transmitter?
Yes. So each one of those dots is a bird, and so when it moves, that's the bird moving. Just the tail to show the bird moving. So So basically, that's showing essentially a weather event. Or like, when a weather event would show up, all the mallards would move. So it's kind of cool to look at and see, okay, either a big weather event or all the water froze up and they got kicked out of that area.
So when you look at one bird, you can extrapolate that to mean they're probably flying with a group of other birds.
Yeah. And this is an individual hen that nested in the Adirondacks, just to show kind of how they can figure out whether she is nesting or not. You see how it goes back to that blue square constantly? It leaves to go out to pee, and then she goes back and stays there for a while. And then, so basically she stays in a pretty small area while she's nesting and just continues to go back and forth.
What's the scale on that? Like that, that longest line, how far do you think that is?
Mile, maybe less. I don't know, I'm not familiar with this area, so I don't know the size of those wetlands, but I would say it's no more than a mile. Probably less, probably half.
What pond is that, you know?
What kind of fish are in that?
I don't know where.
Can't use live bait.
Yeah.
Then update on avian influenza, it is still around. In the last 3 months, we've had one backyard flock that was chickens, I believe, were depopulated up in the kingdom. We had 3 reported die-offs of Canada geese that we're waiting results on. And then, as most of you probably saw, just last week, I guess, there were 2 red-tailed hawks and 1 bobcat that tested positive for avian influenza, or they were carrying it. We don't know yet whether that was what killed them. We're waiting confirmation for the test results. Now, move into some of the population data for 2023. Habitat conditions range from fair to excellent. It's a wide range, but it's a huge area that these surveys are done over. So conditions can vary widely depending on where they are. Mallard breeding population in Atlantic Flyway decreased by 4%, but it still remains about 6% below the long-term average. And total duck breeding population estimates decreased by 7% across the U.S. And is now sitting about 9% below the long-term average in the traditional survey area. Traditional survey area is the Canada, mostly Western Canada. Atlantic Flyway didn't. It's much more difficult to survey in the Atlantic Flyway due to forest cover. So the original surveys didn't start out in the Northeast. So those were kind of established at a later date once different techniques were established. The wood duck population in Vermont was sitting at around 5,021 for breeding pairs. Sorry, this is breeding. Oh, this is individuals. Mallard breeding population was around 23,000. Banding efforts on resident Canada geese were difficult to some degree. So they were just harder to find large groups. We were able to find a few that got our numbers up, but overall there were smaller groups across the state. So it was a lot of effort to get a smaller number of birds banded this year. There's good brood rearing cover in the early spring, and we got heavy rains midsummer, which was hopefully after most broods had hatched. So it was good, very good brood rearing habitat when all the areas flooded out. Lots of available food potentially if the aquatic vegetation was able to grow enough before it got flooded. And fall duck banding, we did really well. On 3 banding sites, we banded over 900 new birds. I believe in 9 or 10 different rocket shots. We were averaging close to 100 birds per rocket shot, so we did pretty well, including a lot more pintails than we have in any recent years, and over 140 green-winged teal, which is pretty rare. So Canada geese are broken down into three main populations in the Atlantic Flyway. The Atlantic population, which breeds up on the Ngaba Peninsula. The North Atlantic population, which breeds in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the resident population, which is the birds that you see around here all summer long, and that goes up to the 48th parallel, I believe. So a little over the border into Canada. And that's anything south of that that's breeding is considered a resident bird. So the land population of Canada geese breeding pairs was around 115,000 this year, which is down from last year. And there has been a decline over the last few years. It's unclear what's causing this decline or what has caused this decline. But there are also multiple projects going on right now, putting transmitters on Canada geese to look at where they're going, when they're migrating, so that we can better set seasons moving forward. Vermont resident geese, we were about 9,500 birds this year, which again is down from our steady decline, but we've kind of plateaued at around the goal, the target number. So we're happy with that, basically. So Vermont waterfowl hunting and harvest data. So in 2022, there were about 1,900 active duck hunters that harvested an average of 7.8 birds per season during the season. And there were about, which average out to about 14,500 birds harvested throughout the season. And Canada geese harvest was 15,683, and total season snow goose, which is not a great estimate because it's based on a very small sample size, was 107. And we're still hovering around 6,000 duck stamp purchases every year. We've been at that level basically from the initial peak of duck stamp sales in 1980. And that was mostly from collectors. So the way we get that information is through three main tools. The Hunter Information Program, or HIP, which anybody who's going to hunt waterfowl has to sign up for a HIP number. They're asked a series of questions, how many birds they harvested the year before in several different categories: ducks, geese, woodcock, doves, snipe. The parts collection survey, a random selection of the people who get a HIP number are selected each year, and they're asked to send in a wing or the tail feathers of a goose. So the wings come from ducks, tail feathers and geese into the the parks lab in Maryland for the Atlantic Flyway. And then a group of biologists get together and they look at all the wings. You can identify ducks by age and sex and species from the wing. So that gives us an idea of what the age ratios are, what the sex ratios are, and what species are being harvested each year. And then the third component is hunter diaries. So another different subset are asked to fill out a diary during their hunting season to basically say how many birds and what species they harvested during what days during the season. So this is again showing how the duck stamp numbers have kind of plateaued at this point. Established in 1985, and lots of great work has been done with these funds. It's raised over $6 million, spent over $3 million in just the interest on these projects. It's probably over 99 projects. These are last year's numbers, but it's probably over 99 projects and more than 12,000 acres at this point. So we do plan to have 2 controlled hunting areas again this year: a Mud Creek, which will be Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays. The first 2 days will be by draw only, and self-registration after those 2 days. And then again, we'll do Dead Creek Goose Management Area, which will be Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a special youth hunt So there's 5 hunting zones. Hunters now supply their own band blinds. And all sites are built by lottery, and zones will be assigned. And so Vermont is broken into 3 waterfowl hunting zones. The Lake Champlain zone, which is shared by New York, and Vermont has the authority to set that zone. The interior Vermont zone, which is entirely in Vermont, so we have the authority to set that, and the Connecticut River zone, which is shared with New Hampshire and set by New Hampshire. So coming up in 2025, we'll have an opportunity to change zones if we like. And they have to remain in place for 5 years. So you can have 4 zones with no splits. You can have 3 splits with no zones, or you can have 3 zones and split each of those into 2 parts.
Say that again.
Yeah. So now moving into our seasons and bag limit recommendations. Woodcock season recommendation, the federal framework allows us to have 45 days between September 13th and January 31st with a daily bag limit of 3. Our recommendation is to hold the season September 28th to November 11th. This would start on the same day as grouse and other small game species, and 3 bird bag limit. Snipe season allows for 107 days between September 1st and January 31st with an 8 bird bag limit. Our recommendation is to hold it to coincide with the woodcock season, but to have an 8 bird daily bag limit. September early resident season, we're allowed 25 days between September 1st and the 25th with a limit of 15 per day. Our recommendation is to hold it from September 1st to the 25th with an 8 bird daily bag limit in the Lake Champlain and interior Vermont zones. And New Hampshire is restricted because the Connecticut River zone falls in the North Atlantic population zone, and New Hampshire statute restricts their limit to 5 per day. For the migratory Atlantic population season, which would be just the interior Vermont zone and the Lake Champlain zone, we're allowed 45 days between October 10th and February 5th with a daily limit of 3. Our recommendation is to hold that from October 12th to November 25th with a 3-day bag limit. For the late resident season, which we were allowed to start 2 years ago, I believe, due to a large number of birds hanging around the state, which we believe to be resident birds, after the Atlantic birds had moved through. We're allowed 77 days between December 1st and February 15th with a daily limit of 5. Because we've already used up 70 days, we're allowed a total of 107 days per species group. We can only have we can only have 37 more days. So from December 1st to January 6th with a 5-day bird bag limit. New Hampshire is not allowed this season, so part of this recommendation is to have it in the lands of Vermont, including the lands of the Connecticut River Zone, but not the waters of the Connecticut River Zone, because Connecticut River is primarily owned by New Hampshire. For snow geese, federal framework allows for 107 days between October 1st and March 10th, with a daily bag limit of 25 per day. Also a conservation order in the spring. Recommendation is from October 1st to December 31st, and then from February 24th to March 10th. And then starting conservation order on March 11th and running to April 27th. Daily bag limit for the regular season is 25 per day and 15 per day in the conservation order. We basically don't get snow geese anymore. We get 2,500 at most through the state at one time. So there's not a lot of opportunity here, but we offer it because we have the ability to. For Atlantic Brant, season length. Federal framework allows for 30 days between September 23rd and January 31st with 1 day, 1 bird per day bag limit. Our recommendation is October 12th to November 10th, and 1 bird per day. Waterfowl hunting, we're allowed 2 days within 2 weeks of either end of the waterfowl season. That can also be within the regular waterfowl season as well, if we so choose. Some states have 1 day in the beginning of their season, 1 day at the end of their season. Our recommendation is to have that the youth season on September 28th and this 29th. And this falls outside of the resident Canada goose season this year. Some years it falls in and it makes things a little more complicated. And a youth hunter must be accompanied by an adult, at least 18 years old, and the adult cannot be carrying a gun, but they can help with everything else.
What's the bag limit?
It's the same regular bag limits as the waterfowl season. So our duck season recommendations, we're allowed 60 days between September 21st and January 31st. Daily bag limit of 6 per day. Our recommendation for the interior zone is to start October 5th and run straight through December 3rd. Lake Champlain zone start, the first segment would be October 5th to October 13th. And then second segment would be November 9th to December 29th. With a daily bag limit of 6 per day. I believe the only changes in the species specific bag limits are that sea ducks, no more than 4, but can only be 3 scoters, 3 eiders, and only 1 of those eiders can be a hen, or 3 long-tailed ducks, and no harlequins. So I believe the only change this year is that eiders are limited to 1 hen, which we don't get many eiders through here anyway, so it's not very applicable, but there are some that come through. Mergansers are coincide with duck seasons. It's a separate bag limit of 5 per day. Falconry seasons coincide with any open waterfowl season. And so basically the next steps are for the board to do an initial vote tonight. And then they're posted online. Our recommendation, they're posted online. We have 2 public hearings in March, March 12th in Ticonderoga and March 14th in Essex District Office, both starting at 6:30 p.m. And then the board will bring our final recommendations back to the board on April 4th, whatever, the early April board meeting, April 3rd. And then once they're approved, the commission will sign off on these. We have to submit them to the Fish and Wildlife Service by April 30th. And then they're posted in the Federal Register and we can release the syllabus in August.
So for every species, you recommend following the daily bag limit of as liberal as possible by the federal guidelines. Explain again why you broke from that for the resident Canada geese.
So the late resident season, so we're allowed a total of 107 days per species group. So for Canada geese, we're only allowed to have 107 days open season. So 25 of those days are taken up by the early resident season in September. Then 45 days of those days are set to be open in October and November. So that only leaves 37 days remaining for the late season. And you were asking more about the bag limit for the early season.
Yeah, it wasn't federal 15.
Yeah. So yeah, Dave can give some history on that.
We originally started out years ago where it was a 5 per daily bag limit. Then as the population increased, kept increasing, we bumped it up to 8, see if we could rein it in a little bit. And that's what has happened in the last few years. It's right around that 10 to 12,000 breeding pair limit. We could bump it up to 15 if we wanted to knock them down further, but then it's really a season to reduce the number of resident birds that are out there. But the individuals enjoy seeing them mostly. We get a lot of complaints from, certain individuals that own beaches and, lawns that are right on the waterfront, but most people still enjoy them. So we're trying to mix that balance of, wildlife observation and still providing opportunity to hunt at the same time.
And then, and I apologize if you explained it earlier on in your presentation. Can you explain again what a conservation order is?
So the conservation order is a special season outside of the regular federal frameworks. So basically it is exempt from most of the standard migratory game bird hunting regulations. So you can use unplugged shotguns, you can use electronic collars to get the birds in closer. You can also shoot until sunset, I believe. Any other? Yeah, those are the 3 main things that are allowed within the season that are not allowed in the standard waterfowl season. And this is basically when it first came about in the 90s, late 90s. Snow geese were decimating the Arctic, and this was a way to get higher harvest levels. They reduced bag limits, or they increased bag limits, got rid of possession limits, basically as a way to kind of get more birds taken out of the population by hunters rather than going up and treating nests and doing other tactics on the breeding grounds.
I think at that time it was 1.2 million breeding pairs.
Yeah.
And the goal is to get down to around 500,000.
Yeah, and we're at around 550, 600,000 right now, I think. Within the Atlantic flyway, so the greater snow geese. The lesser snow geese in the central and Mississippi flyways are, I don't even know what their population, they're at like 5 or 6 million breeding pairs right now.
Are they seeing the same effects to the Arctic?
Yeah. So basically the entire rim of Hudson Bay and further north on Ungava and everything, the geese basically decimated all the vegetation within a couple miles essentially of water. They're colonial nesters, so and they're grazers, so they basically pick everything. And then
Yeah. Also, part of the goal was other species because they're impacting habitat so much. A lot of your shoreline up there are being impacted, and eventually assume that the population of snow geese might just crash. And
because of this, some others like Arctic foxes have been flourishing because they have ample food sources. Polar bears have now started to shift some of their feeding onto snow geese and snow geese eggs, just because without ice pack, they can then access geese on land pretty easily. It's had a whole ecological system alteration, basically, that basically we've been trying to, and the population's exploded because of a lot of grain production in the south on their winter grounds. They weren't going through hard winters. They had ample food sources, so most of them were surviving through the winter and could go back to breed.
And then one final question: what kind of turnout do the public hearings have for the bird?
My first ones last year, Ticonderoga was in the middle of a blizzard and we were getting like 8 inches of snow, so we had 2 people.
on average, the New York one averages somewhere between 20 and 30.
Yeah, and then the Essex one we had 25 or 30.
Brad?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I just have a quick question. You mentioned this earlier in your discussion about you're trying to strike a balance between the nuisance factor of the resident geese and then the bag limit. And I'm just curious how the bag limit, and you know, where I live in Vermont, most of the people that hunt geese are hunting them in cornfields and whatnot in the fall. And are we doing a good job of dealing with the nuisance birds, or is there an impact on the nuisance bird, or is that still a growing issue? Even though I know you're trying to balance the two, but I'm just wondering how targeted are we getting or able to get in addressing the nuisance component of the Canadian geese?
I don't know if the nuisance program is growing or problem is growing, or if it's been maintained at a pretty steady level. But a lot of those nuisance complaints come in places that are not very good for hunting. So that is a very difficult challenge to manage. And some of the landowners don't allow hunting, so that contributes to the issue. But wildlife services will not give permits unless they have tried multiple different techniques to, wildlife services does not give the permits. They have to fill out a form so that then Fish and Wildlife Service can issue that permit. So it's just a very difficult balance. I'm still new enough in this position that I don't have enough background to know what the rate of nuisance complaints is, if it's increasing or decreasing, or if it's just the same people that we hear from every year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Andrew, I guess at your very first slide commented on 36% decline in eastern mallards. We're also dealing with avian influenza. And I think, if I understand correctly, we're suggesting that our bag limits remain the same. And I guess I need help understanding, if we're worried about this population, why are we keeping the bag limit the same?
So that is a very good question, a very difficult question to answer. So the population can still withstand this harvest. I believe there's a threshold of, so the population can withstand basically up to 4 birds per harvest. Once you go above that threshold, then it starts having a population level impact. But below that, it's mostly compensatory. So it's basically only taking out the surplus species, the birds that are going to die anyway throughout the year. But once you get above that 4 bird limit, then it has the potential to have an additive impact to the population. So the flyway and all scientists believe that the population can withstand this harvest. And we are currently, with this data, will give us a much better picture of what is going on. And hopefully this will allow us to then move forward in different mallard harvest strategies moving forward.
And generally, the reason Vermont sticks with the most liberal harvest amount is the impact that Vermont has on the entire flyways.
We harvest very few ducks in comparison to most of the other states. I mean, just Atlantic Flyway in general has a much smaller waterfowl population. You go, I mean, basically every state west of the Atlantic Flyway has a higher duck harvest than any of the Atlantic Flyway states. Just that's where all the ducks are. I mean, wooded areas are not waterfowl habitat. I mean, there's a few species that nest in wooded areas: black ducks, wood ducks, mergansers, golden eyes, nesting species, and then black ducks were evolved in the Atlantic Flyway. When you get out, ducks primarily nest in grassland areas. So once you get out into the prairies, there's just significantly more ducks. So yeah, it's just.
So what I'm hearing is that the species has a 36% decline, but Vermont's role and our bag limits don't play a large or significant role in helping or taking away from that population.
And that, what they found over the decades is that the season length has a larger impact on the daily bag limit. So you have more exposure days to being hunted. So the bag limit is just more opportunity for those hunters. And if you look at the surveys that he talked about, the park survey, most waterfowl hunters think it's, well, Sugar Mountain was 7 or 8.
Yeah, it's under 10, even across the country, average harvest per year is under 10 birds.
And quite often it's 3 a year because of people, just the amount of pressure, they only have so many days to go out, so.
I have a question, black ducks and mallard can interbreed.
Yeah.
Have you seen in your cannon netting surveys or at that big wing bee they have in Maryland every year, have you seen much of that?
There's certainly hybridization. It's not as big of a concern as people once thought it was. Now some of the new research is showing that the bigger issue with the mallard decline is likely due to game farm mallards. So over the last 100 years, people were buying mallards from basically Agway mallards and releasing them, but on a massive scale. Like New Jersey released, not the state, but different hunt clubs and stuff release 200,000 mallards a year in that area. So they're finding that is a bigger reason why the decline is occurring. Or that's one theory right now, that basically people have been releasing fewer birds and those birds are not as well adapted to survive winters and breed efficiently because they were bred to be captive birds.
I think that interbreeding go up, but I think that hurts black ducks more than
it does.
Mallards.
Yeah, and mallard and black duck population is still going up, which is a really good sign. And I believe a lot of that also has to do with habitat, with more timber stands growing up and stuff. That's more black duck habitat and less mallard habitat. I mean, mallards will nest anywhere, but it is generally more black duck habitat.
I have another follow-up question, sorry. I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding that the bag limits and season that Vermont doesn't have an overall oversized impact on the population, but I still want to ask questions about it. So you're recommending that we not reduce the season length either, because again, it's just not going to have an effect on the overall population.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the mallards can withstand it. I mean, the population is lower than it has been, but based on all the modeling, they can withstand this level of harvest.
Okay, thank you.
And last year, I recall the season dates were adjusted. And the duck hunters liked that because they felt they would harvest more adult ducks, larger ducks by making that adjustment, if I recall.
Yeah, this is basically mimicking to some degree last year's season. So, and I'll move forward that. The only thing that was the SCOP 2-in-1. I flip that around and I'll see what people say. Whether I haven't talked to enough people to know if they liked having the 2 in the late season versus the early season. So I just flipped it back to the way it was, and I'll listen and hear from people and potentially switch that back to kind of. Oh, yes, and we are in the process. I believe within 2 days it'll be approved, or the contract will be signed. We're going to be doing a waterfowl hunter survey this spring to get, because our last one was done 10 years ago. So it's very outdated at this point. To give us a good picture of hunter perspectives and hunter interests, so waterfowl hunter interests, so that we can make better recommendations moving forward.
Do you have your hand up, Brad?
I do. I just have a quick question. I'm curious what impact flooding has had on our, gosling population and whatnot during the, shortly after springtime or around the springtime when, we're all seeing the, the young birds out in the fields or wherever they might be. And then we have some of these floods, and what kind of impact has that had here on our populations?
So that was done after all our surveys, so you can't really tell population level impact, but in theory, the flooding would have benefited these birds because of when it occurred. It opened up new areas for them to use for brood rearing, potentially opened up food depending on if any of those moist soil plants could have seeded out prior to being flooded. And it happened after the primary nesting season. So it shouldn't have flooded out as many nests. In the grand scheme of things, it was very good timing as long as the moist soil plants could have gotten up. So likely brood rearing was very good this year on most waterfowl.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
So can you, very nice job. Can you go to the last page where you have the, I think it was the next steps? So tonight, the board, we're looking for a straw vote. For the,
Put that up there too, if you'd like. I have it on my computer.
yeah, can you please? So we're looking for a straw vote, for, accepting the migratory bird hunting season recommendation.
Nothing, you don't need a motion, do
Do you need a
you?
motion to straw vote?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
All right, should we go individual? Or is it
Just
just,
have people raise their hand.
all right, all in favor of the board recommendations, raise your hand. I think we got it. All right, proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Abigail, where do we stand on? Okay, so we'll press on. Last up, 2024 moose season recommendation, straw vote. Commissioner, take it away.
Thanks. It's always a good presentation, and we have our resident moose expert. Also a shed owner extraordinaire.
Apparently it is here.
All right.
Oh, you're off the hook.
All right, we're gonna like take a break, quick food break, and come back
By
in
the bell.
15 minutes. All board members are back in the room. Mics are recording again. They're on.
That's terrible.
I promise I'll be more interesting than this.
They're always good.
So hopefully you've all had a chance to review the recommendation. Hopefully you all noticed that it is the same recommendation you approved last year. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that specifically, but I want to go into why it is the same as last year. And kind of the current status of the moose population. So, first off, I went through this last month with you, but quick recap of last fall's moose hunt. We issued 180 permits. Archery hunters, there ended up being 23 archery hunters. They took a total of 10 moose, all bulls. So that was the 20 permits we gave out, plus the 3 auction winners, which, like I said, pretty much always choose archery now. And then the regular season, 68 total moose. Most of those permits, 100 of them were for
antlerless moose only, so that's why we took more cows than bulls. And those success rates, both with either set permits and antlerless only permits, were the lowest success rates we think ever had in the regular season. Weather was terrible. It rained the first 3 days. That's hunting effort, not moose, but hunters. And then the last end of the season was warm, so it was just really. And it was late, so totally past the rut. Calling bulls was not an effective option. So our goals for moose, we have statewide moose population objectives. They're set in our 10-year big game plan. Most of the state, which is moose range, so the lighter green, the kind of gray areas are not moose range. It might be occasional one wanders through there, but it's not really moose. Lighter green area, we have a density objective of 0.5. That's a carryover from earlier plans. Probably not an appropriate objective. Most of those units have never had 0.5 moose per square mile and never got that high. It was an early estimate of what we thought the habitat could support, but clearly an overestimate. So we're going to try to revisit those. We're working on that, but that'll be a while. Up in the Northeast Kingdom, we have this higher objective of basically 1 moose per square mile now. And that is reflective of we've had more moose than that in the past, but we also know that more than 1 moose per square mile leads to a lot of winter tick problems. So we want to keep that population down to about 1 or potentially lower if we have to. This is where we're at currently. So there's a lot going on here, but the green bar is our current moose density estimate in each wildlife management unit. The blue bar is the target, where we'd like to be in that unit. The orange smaller bar is a cutoff, hunting threshold cutoff. So we're not going to consider hunting moose if we're below that orange bar. You can see the only place we're above the hunting threshold or our objective is WMU's E1 and E2, as it has been, and we're well above where we'd like to be. I will note, can't see my laser pointer on the screen, but WMUC, we're very close to our hunting threshold, and that has been kind of trending upward. And then WMUD2, which quite frankly should not have an objective of 1. When we redrew the boundaries back in 2014, we took all of the moose habitat out of D2. So it should probably have a 0.5 objective. And if that was the case, we'd probably be considering hunting there. So that's, again, part of that reconsidering of what are our appropriate targets in the rest of the state.
This may be a stupid question. Why isn't that orange dotted line the same across all WMU?
So that orange threshold, the way we set it in the big game plan was that it was 75% of the target. So higher target leads to a higher threshold. Maybe the same for everyone would have been a more appropriate way to do it, but that's the way we chose to do it. So this is what our moose population looks like distributed across the state. Each dot represents a moose, 1 estimated moose in the underlying wildlife management unit. We don't actually know where every moose is in the state, but we know we have an idea anyway of how many are in each management unit. And these are actually clustered a little bit to be in large forest blocks. So that's why, like in H, all the moose are on the east side and the west side, and then none in the middle around Barry, Montpelier. That's because there's not really moose out there. So they are clustered a little bit, not just evenly spaced in the WMU. But point is, you can see we have a ton more moose in E. Much higher density of moose, which of course leads to some problems. In the rest of Vermont, our main things limiting our moose population are brainworm, which is parasite moose get that deer carry. Doesn't affect deer, but is usually fatal to a moose, or at least often fatal to a moose. And of course, where we have more deer, which is everywhere outside of WMUE, we have higher incidence of brainworm. And then the other factor, probably the most important factor limiting moose numbers outside of WMUE, is we just don't have much long forest habitat anywhere in the state. Moose eat exclusively browse. They eat the leaves and twigs of woody vegetation. So if there's no leaves and twigs of woody vegetation within reach of a moose, nothing for a moose to eat, right? They're not like a deer. They don't have the varied diet. Parts of the state that have deer habitat that look like that, those deer are feeding in a farm field or they're feeding on acorns in the fall. There's other food sources deer can take advantage of. Moose can't. They don't have alternatives, right? So moose, you really need that young forest habitat to support any high number of moose. And we just don't have that in most of them. So that's why no moose hunting in most of them. Not a lot of moose. We're below our objectives for now. So we're not considering hunting there. We're only recommending permits up in E, where we have very high densities of moose. And so bigger context here, WMU-E is part of this larger core range of moose in New England, includes northern New Hampshire, most of western and northern Maine. This area has much higher moose densities than the rest of the region. In fact, some of the highest moose densities in all of North America. And a few reasons for that. So one is climate, right? We're at the southern edge of moose range. Most of our moose are going to be in the coldest part of the region, the longest winters. So that's northeastern Vermont, northern Hampshire, and western and northern Maine. Yeah, long cold winters, moose just prefer that. Even in southern Vermont, where we have moose, it tends to be at higher elevation, where we have longer, colder winters. Also fewer deer, sort of in there, but and then again, the big driver, that area is almost entirely commercial timberland. So there's a ton of logging, happens frequently, and it tends to be fairly intensive, and it creates absolutely fantastic moose habitat, which is why this area supports some of the highest moose densities in all of North America. So this is moose range across North America, and estimated densities. This is from a paper published a few years ago. The data are now more than a decade old, but the point is still the same. You see the higher density band across the middle, where you have productive enough habitat, but you're also far enough north to not have issues with competition from the south. But zooming in on the higher density parts, the red areas on this map are the only places in all of North America where moose exists at 1 moose per square mile or greater density. Not very many places. Northeastern Vermont and northern Hampshire are the southernmost places where that's a thing that happens. That whole core range in northern New England, like I said, some of the highest moose densities in all of North America. It is not normal. It's not natural for moose. They didn't evolve at high densities like that. Primary reason they can exist is commercial timberland. So we made essentially artificial habitat that's ideal for them. And there aren't any wolves south of the St. Lawrence River. So that area can sustain really high densities of moose. And that high density of moose leads to some problems. But also just to, so I want to show the trend, right? Like, yes, we have fewer moose than we had 15, 20 years ago. Absolutely. But that was an intentional reduction. And in the past 10 or 12 years, we've been pretty stable with our moose population in E. This is just E. But this current density, about 1.5 moose per square mile, is a ton of moose. It's a very high density of moose. And we need to understand that, even though it is a third of what we had 15 years ago. It is a very high density of moose as moose go. And that high density causes problems primarily with winter tick, right? So you all know this, you've seen this a million times, but winter tick is not the species of tick most people are familiar with. It's a different species. I think there are 14 or maybe now 15 species of tick in Vermont. Winter ticks have a very unique life cycle that makes them problematic for moose, and really only moose, not other species. So unlike other ticks, winter ticks are a single host tick. So they spend their entire life, all 3 stages, on one animal. Most ticks feed on one thing as a larva, drop off, feed on a different animal as a nymph, drop off, and then feed on a different animal as an adult. That's why they spread diseases from animal to animal. But that's also why they don't cause major problems, because they're only on an animal for a limited period of time. Winter ticks are spending an entire winter on one animal, going through that whole life cycle. That's problematic for moose because and not other animals because moose don't groom and everything else does. So if a tick has to spend 6 months on you to complete its life cycle, anything that grooms is gonna knock 99.999% of those ticks off at some point over that 6 months. Moose basically don't groom until it's way too late in the cycle and they realize, oh, I really itch. And so they start trying to rub on things, but it's too late at that point. So poor grooming practices by moose is why this is really problematic for moose. The other thing is the timing. When all of those ticks in the late fall or early fall, I should say, usually starts in September and mostly October, when those larval ticks are questing for a moose. So they're up on vegetation waiting for something to walk by, moose or otherwise. That's right peak rut for moose. So that's when moose are most active. They're roaming around the landscape a lot, looking for a mate. So they tend to pick up a lot more winter ticks than other species might at that time of year because they're moving more. Winter ticks aren't picked up one at a time. Winter ticks are picked up by the hundreds. They quest in larval clusters. So it's not that moose are picking up ticks just constantly on every piece of vegetation they walk by. They might hit one of these clusters once a day over the course of 6 weeks, and they end up with 30,000 ticks on them. But they only maybe hit 30 or 40 clusters, but 500 to 1,000 ticks at a time. And so that's why they end up with a ton, and then they spend the whole winter. And the only place this is a problem for moose is where we have a ton of moose, right? You can find winter ticks on moose everywhere in the Northeast. Winter ticks are actually, I'm not going to say they're the most widely distributed tick in North America, but they got to be close. They're found across North America. I know they're found in Texas and New Mexico all the way up through, but they exist at very, very, very low numbers in the absence of moose because very few of them can actually get through that life cycle on a different animal. So every moose in New England is going to have winter ticks on them. But if a moose in southern Vermont or Massachusetts has 1,000 winter ticks on it, that's not a problem for an animal the size of a moose. It's when we start getting into the tens of thousands that it's a problem. And that only happens where we have very high densities. So our goal, our ultimate goal is to have a healthy moose population. I don't really care. I mean, I care, but it's not about how many moose we have out there. We want the moose we have to be healthy. We know if we have a healthy moose population, particularly in WMUE, that's going to be a more sustainable population. We will have moose longer into the future. They'll be able to withstand whatever the next stressor is that maybe we don't even know about yet. But long-term prognosis with climate change isn't great, so we want to get them as healthy as possible. We'll have them as long as possible. To get them healthy, we have to address ticks. We cannot manage winter ticks directly. I have to throw a slide in there. It's like mandatory at this point, and again, you all know this, but there is no treatment for winter ticks. There are no predators of winter ticks. When they're off post, they're a tiny, tiny, tiny little larvae that most people probably can't even see. Nothing's going to eat them. They're too small. There are fungi, and research at UVM has looked at these you can kill ticks in a lab very effectively with fungi. Applying that across a landscape to really control a tick population, not remotely practical now, probably not going to be anytime in the foreseeable future. We're still trying, like it might be a tool on local areas, like that research is ongoing, but there is no practical way to do this. And even if there was, applying some sort of pesticide broadly across a landscape, generally not how we want to manage anything. So it's not the appropriate management approach, and it doesn't address the problem. Problem is you have too many moose. The ticks are just going to come back once they become immune or you stop treatments or whatever. So revisiting that population trend for the past, whatever that is, 12 years now, we've been pretty stable around 1 moose per square mile. There's been some fluctuation in our estimate, but realistically, we think we've been pretty stable about where we're at. We know that that is high enough to support high numbers of winter ticks, right? We did our research project 5 years ago now. We know we were losing 50% of our calves. We know it's having major impacts on adult productivity. So we know that density of moose is too high. We don't know where it's going to fall apart, how low we have to go, but we know we have to go down. So now we're trying to bring that population down if we can. I do want to kind of point where we're at, and there are some encouraging signs here. So I want to look at a few health measures. This is yearling female weight, so 1.5 year old females. And we're starting to see this increase in the last 4 years. In fact, this past season, this is a 3-year rolling average, so it's not every year. This 23 is actually an average of, actually only 22 and 23 average, but most of these are 3 years, like the year before and the year after average together. So our average here in 23 is the highest we've seen since 2003, highest yearling weights. So that's encouraging, right? We're seeing improvement there. Adult female weights, the last 4 years, we've actually been higher than we've been since the early 2000s. So that's encouraging. We're seeing higher female weights. Of course, there's direct correlation between weight, body weight, and productivity, which is what we really care about. This is the ovulation rate. This is what we get from ovaries from moose hunters that get a cow. So again, trending in the right direction, but we just barely creeped above 1 this past year. We have not been above 1 since 2003, 2004, maybe. So again, we're 20 years. We're better than we've been in the past 20 years on these health indices. That is all really encouraging. We are by no means out of the woods. I'm not suggesting we've succeeded at anything yet. We still would like this ovulation rate to be up around 1.2, where it was in the 90s and early 2000s. So we have a long way to go. But seems like we're seeing some encouraging signs. I also want to point out that I don't believe this has anything to do with the number of moose we've killed. I shouldn't say that. This is not driven primarily by the number of moose we've killed in the last 3. Well, it wouldn't even be last year, right? Last year would not affect this at all. But in the 3 years prior to that, I don't think that's what's driving this. Prior to last year, I don't think we had killed enough moose to actually cause population decline. At least not significant enough to affect winter tick abundance. I think what we're seeing here is a combination of, we have killed enough moose to at least prevent growth, population growth, which is very important here. But more so, we've gotten lucky. As far as we can tell, 3 of the past 4 years have been, I'll say, lighter winter tick impacts. So meaning, from what we can tell, we lost a lot fewer calves, had less impact on our adults than what we saw in the 3 years of our study, where we averaged about 50% calf mortality. From what we can tell, 3 of the past 4 years since our study ended have been considerably lower tick impacts. Not low, but lower. So that has helped moose health. The other thing we're seeing, I think, in Essex County has to do more with habitat management, which we have no control over. Again, mostly commercial timberland. But over the past decade-ish, the major owners up there, particularly Weyerhaeuser is the largest owner, they have cut considerably harder than they did in the prior decade. So they've cut a lot more wood, harvested a lot more wood. And that is, it takes 4 or 5 years after you log an area for it to become productive moose habitat for it to actually grow enough. So that took a while to kick in, but at this point, we're seeing, I think, more high quality moose habitat, which is important in and of itself, although I think we always had enough moose habitat before. The bigger thing is that it is now more spread across the landscape evenly. So in the prior to the last, I'll say 5 years, but maybe a little earlier than that, there were a couple areas in E that had seen a lot of logging in the 10 years prior to that, that were the really, really good moose habitat, but it was very concentrated. So you had a large percentage of your moose here concentrated in fairly small areas. So, we're giving you an average density across the unit, but of course those moose are clustered, right? And so locally you might have had 4 or 5 moose per square mile, and that might have that absolutely supports higher abundance of winter ticks. But with more cutting over a larger portion of the unit, we're spreading those moose out. So we're not going to detect that in our density estimate. It's still 1.5 moose per square mile, But instead of that moose being pocketed in 2 or 3 areas, maybe they're now in 10 or 12 areas. And so functionally, we might have reduced density. We've benefited from habitat management we don't control very likely by spreading our moose out. But it is very critical that we have not allowed the population to grow. Because if population had grown with that expanded habitat, we wouldn't have achieved anything, right? So we've gotten lucky, we've had some help, but point is, we are apparently headed in the right direction. We want to keep doing it. So a recommendation this year, again, same as last year, 20 either sex archery season permits. We have a pretty consistent 50% success rate with archery permits, so we expect about 10 moose there. As I think I've mentioned to several of you and maybe the group, but lately all of our auction permit winners, or at least 2 out of the 3, but last year was all 3, have chosen to hunt in the archery season. So I expect that to happen again. Last year, none of them got a moose, interestingly, by choice. As far as I know, they all passed on bulls most people would have shot. They were being picky. But anyway, we expect about 10 in the archery season, maybe more if the auction winners go there. And then the regular season is the remaining, it'll be 54. Well, the auction and special opportunity are in there too, but 54 either sex permits and then 100 antlerless only permits. And the split between E1 and E2 is 55% in E1 and 45% in E2. Despite what our current population estimate says, I think our estimate is higher in E2 currently. In reality, we know the density is higher in E1. Sighting rates in small units. Right? We have more moose in E1, if only slightly. And then the expected harvest from those around here. Anyone who's really paying attention, and Mike pointed this out. Last year, this exact same permit allocation, we thought we'd see 103 moose was our expected harvest given historical success rates. Only 94 now. We know we had low success rates last year. That was not the driver. I adjusted my expectations. Rather than using a long-term average, I used the more recent years to come up with the expected success rates. Because some of the long-term stuff is not relevant anymore. Especially with the antlerless only permits, a lot of the long-term stuff is back when we had 5 moose per square mile. So those success rates, you can't expect to see those success rates now, right? So as you're expected, and then the range there is literally the lowest success rate we've ever had to the highest success rate we've ever had. So the extremes are highly unlikely, but possible. And if we take those 94 moose, and more specifically, I think it's 40, I don't know, someone have to look at, I don't even know if it's in the recommendation. It's 46 or 48 cows is really what drives population. If we take that number of moose every year going forward and nothing else changes, the solid green line would be our expected population trajectory. So we would get to our target in about 6 years, which is the end of our current big game 10-year big game planning period, which we'd like to be at our target, right? The dotted line, the lower one, is if we have really bad ticket impacts the next 2 years. We could get to goal in 2 years. That level of tick impact, this is talking like the really bad stuff. Some of you probably heard like a couple of years ago, Maine lost almost 90% of their calves. I'm talking years like that. Those have never been documented 2 years in a row. Like that level of tick impact does not happen 2 years in a row. But if it did, we'd get right to our goal in 2 years. The upper line here is if we continue to see what we've seen over the past 4 years, which is, one tick year where we probably lost close to 50% of our calves, and then the other 3 that were decent. We lost less than that. If we continue to see that lower level of tick impact, this harvest is not even enough to prevent growth. And I think that point is an important point. So if we somehow fix the tick problem, whether that's reducing moose numbers enough or spreading them out works, and maybe we only need to hold them at the current density, and the broader distribution is going to help break that tick cycle. If we get our moose healthy, this assumes no change in birth rates or survival or anything. If any of those go up, we might actually need to take more moose just to keep the population at the current level, which we even in the absence of ticks, we don't want more moose in this part of the state. They're going to start causing habitat issues, impacts, if we have much more than we currently have. So it's going to require likely this level of harvest, or at least close to this level, in perpetuity to actually maintain a healthy moose population, regardless of ticks. But in the short term, we are trying to reduce them. And with that, I will take any questions.
So you go back one slide to that. You've shown this 3 or 4 years, but however long. Have you redrawn it to show
what we've done in the last few? Yes. I thought about putting that on here. And I probably could. The problem is in prior years, it would just be our estimates. So I can go back to wherever that was. So you'd start about this high point, 2020, and come down. Our estimate in 2020, I will tell you, was an overestimate. That's not how many moose we had, most likely. So that decline that we've seen in the last year estimate is probably not what actually happened on the landscape. You know, this estimate is not perfect. Close, reasonable, but it's certainly not perfect. But I think if I did show that, and so, I mean, you can see the 1 moose per square mile line, that's our goal, right? It's almost on trajectory, essentially. But like I said earlier, I don't think we have actually caused any decline in our moose population in Eden yet. Maybe last year started it, and we might see that this coming year. But certainly the 3 years prior to that, we did not kill enough cow moose. Given the winter tick impacts we actually saw, were less than we were planning on, to reduce the population.
And what's the biggest threat that could derail the improvement in the health of the moose?
At this point, the biggest threat would be, I think, if we allow the population increase, and winter tick abundance increases. If winter tick impacts get worse, I mean, if we stay where we've been the last 4 years, that 1 out of 4 year thing, it's not great, it's not ideal, but that might be okay going forward. We'd like to do better. If we get worse, if we go back to where we were, where we're seeing it almost every year, we're seeing those severe winter tick impacts, or more severe winter tick impacts almost every year, that's going to derail us. I mean, it's going to cause a population decline, but our goal is healthier moose. We definitely need to not allow that to happen. The thing we can control is the abundance.
Brad?
Muted, Brad.
And David, you're unmuted, by the way.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nick. That was very helpful. I just have a couple quick questions. One is, we didn't meet our objective and our target number and came in quite under it. And I think I heard you say that a lot of that may very well have to do with the weather and hunter effort. And so my question is, how do we measure hunter effort? And how do we validate whether or not, part of that really could have been because the weather was crapping and hunters didn't put in, 8 hours, 10 hours a day for 6-7 days. And do you survey the hunters to find out how many hours they actually put in and what their level of effort is?
We do, actually. Every moose hunter gets a survey. It asks how many hours they hunted, how many days, how many hours, how many moose they saw. So we do have that information. I will say that actually didn't show much of a decline in the average number of hours per hunter. But that gets a little funky because you also had more hunters that failed to fill their tag early, so they were hunting, more days because they hadn't filled the tag yet. So they have more total hours, so your average hours are skewed a little bit there. The piece we can't get in our hunter survey, and what I would suggest anecdotally, and some of the wardens that work moose season can probably attest to this. When the weather is crappy like it was the first 3 days of the season, when it rains all the time, you get a lot of hunters who will still claim they're hunting, right? But they're hunting from the windshield of their truck. They're driving logging roads, hoping they see a moose on the side of the road. They're still going to put those hours down as they were moose hunting, but they're not effectively moose hunting. And that's something we really can't capture, but anecdotally, we know that happens especially when it's raining. So, I'm not gonna, we don't have perfect data on it, to your point, but I think we know it was a factor this year.
Okay. And my second point is that we clearly have two issues going on. And I think you did a good job of explaining the two and how they relate to each other. One is the density, moose density per square mile, and the other is the ticks. And I know that in a lot of my conversations with people who ask questions about moose, I think they're pretty well informed on the tick component of it and the impact that ticks are having on moose. I think they're surprised when I tell them that the moose density is higher than our objective. And so I think that, and I don't know how we get that word out and how we make that half of the equation as well known as the tick challenge. But it seems like, I think a lot more people think we're shooting the amount of moose, harvesting the amount of moose that we're harvesting primarily because of the tick situation, and are less informed about the moose density challenge that we have.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brad. And I think, at least personally, I would like to emphasize the density issue more, now going forward. We've leaned heavy on the tick issue for obvious reasons, but I think you're right. I think we do need to maybe emphasize the density element of it a little more.
Go back to the ovulation slide. So tell me so you're asking hunters who harvest the cow to bring in the uterus. Ovaries. How do you correlate that? What information are you extracting when you send it to the lab and do a study?
Now, the lab is me sitting here with a slicing up ovary. So essentially you take the ovaries, you fix them in alcohol, and then you can slice them, and you actually can see, it's called a corpora lutea, which is what's on the right. It's basically a scar where an egg was released.
Okay.
So it tells you how many eggs, and this is after the moose have bred. So this is how many, and these corpora lutea will only show up after they've actually fertilized those eggs. So this is essentially how many calves that moose was carrying. They're only embryos at that point, but how many calves that moose was carrying. So this is how many calves she would have given birth to following spring. It's still been alive. So obviously a healthier population, healthier moose produce more calves. Right? You have a higher twinning rate. In deer, we just tend to talk about an average rate, 1 point, whatever it is in deer, 1.6, 1.7. In moose, they tend to call it twinning rate more often, which it's the same thing. 1.2, call it calves per cow here. That means 20% of your cows are producing twins. We basically don't see twins right now, right? Which is why we're hovering around 1 or below 1. So we want to get up where we still have room for improvement here, for sure. This is not a healthy moose population currently, but we're headed in the right direction.
So we don't necessarily want to look at seeing twins on the landscape, but I called you a couple of years ago and said, I saw a set of twins. It's going to increase the numbers, which is kind of against what the plan is, but isn't that an indication of healthy?
Yeah, and that I think that gets to my point of like, if we get healthy, we can reach our 1.2 or even 1.1 would be great. If we get healthier, we're producing more calves. Presumably, we're also seeing better survival of those calves after they hit the ground. And yeah, so that means we might actually need to harvest more moose in the future to keep the population from growing if our productivity is higher and our surplus is higher. So yeah, it's sort of counter to our goal, but okay, and more opportunity.
One last question, which is aside from this. Massive logging operations, and it actually, when the growth came back, it allowed them to disperse. Which keeps the ticks down supposedly if they're not all jammed together. Do you do any ongoing work with the Weyerhaeuser company in that regard? Did they contact you and say, hey, we're gonna cut this place? Yeah, they probably.
I mean, we have a
In years past,
relationship.
they've asked you to kill. They couldn't grow timber.
Correct. And I don't think we quite have that same relationship where they're begging us to kill moose.
Yeah.
But we have a pretty close relationship with Weyerhaeuser. You know, for various reasons. I mean, we hold some easements on all of their land. So we have relationships, but we also have no control really with some minor limitations. They can go, for the most part, cut where they want to cut. Regardless, whatever they've been doing has helped. Right? Seems to. We have, I'm going to say 18 working collars still out there. They are all now beyond their expected battery life. They're more than 7 years old. Those collars have been out. They are clearly starting to fail. We get mortality signals on an almost daily basis now, even though the moose is still moving around. You know, this collar, things are starting to, the batteries are dying, things are starting to fail on them. But yeah, we're still, last fall, we monitored, I think 15 of those we can still walk in on and see if they have a calf. So we still monitor those. And if they hang on till this August, we'll try to do that again this year. And, you know, that'll be 7 years of reproductive data on those particular animals. So it's pretty impressive data set.
And are you planning to put more out on it?
We are not currently planning to do any more collaring. No, there's not a lot we can gain from collaring that, quite frankly, we can't get from harvested moose at this point because we have enough of a harvest. This is a fantastic source of data. It's not why we harvest moose, but we're going to harvest moose. It is a fantastic one.
Nick, do you seen any sign of liver flukes, or is that hard to quantify?
So we have never documented liver flukes in Vermont. Of course, we don't see most of the livers. Right? Those tend to stay in the woods. But that said, a moose heavily infested with liver flukes is something a hunter would notice. We never had a report of it.
Especially juveniles, aren't they?
It can be any age of moose. I think we would more likely see it in southern Vermont first. New York has it.
Yeah, I was reading an article about, that's where I
pretty
asked.
readily.
Yeah.
So we might in southern Vermont, but of course we sample so few moose from southern Vermont. You know, basically what wardens pick up, and get that. So we've never documented it here. Neither has New Hampshire or Maine. So probably a future concern, an extra parasite for those southern Vermont moose that are already struggling, but I don't think a major concern in the near future.
You mentioned a good relationship with Weyerhaeuser. How is the relationship with the Conte Refuge? And second question, has the harvesting on the tree cutting on the state land, West Mountain, changed at all?
I'm going to defer that to someone who knows more.
Our relationship with the Conte Refuge is good. There's the issue with the hunt plan where we've had some concerns about that, but generally speaking, we've got a great relationship with them. We collaborate on the management of the property, dealing with issues of public access. They've done a number of habitat management projects to improve habitat for woodcock, for moose. What was the other question?
It's
West Mountain.
Yes.
So yeah, we have a long-range management plan. It's actually about to expire. We're gonna have to renew it. It's gotta be renewed every 10 years. We had a number of large-scale timber harvests prescribed in that plan. Almost all of them have been completed. We've got one that is out for sale this winter. The conditions haven't been great for that, but that is operating in the woods because of lack of frozen ground. Although now it's looking pretty good. So there's still some harvesting going on up there. But I think we're probably reaching the point where we're going to need a new plan before we can start to implement additional harvesting. But in that same general area, we've done extensive harvest recently at Victory Wildlife Management Area and Victory State Forest. And we have some harvests planned up at Bill Sladek Wildlife Management Area.
Yeah, it's important to keep in mind too that a large portion of West Mountain is core area that. Yeah, it's not just Weyerhaeuser that's doing more cutting. It's really all of the landowners in the unit. Whose habitat is more spread out. So I guess if no further questions, here's your next steps. Nice presentation. We get the preliminary straw vote, and then we have public hearings scheduled. These are the deer and moose hearings for March 18th in Hardwick, March 20th in Brattleboro, and March 21st in Enosburg. Nice, I get to go from one end of the state to the next. And then, of course, this written recommendation will be online. We'll probably put a version of my presentation online as well. So anyone can comment and view that. And then on the 3rd, same as the waterfowl, will be the final, the one vote that actually counts for this.
Where in Hardwick is your hearing?
At Hazen High School.
And a calendar was sent out to board members.
What?
Yep, just some preliminary dates.
At deer and moose.
Those are, yeah, deer and moose.
We will get notified again as things solidify. Obviously, I'm interested in when and where in Brattleboro.
That one's gonna be at the high school. Brattleboro High School at 6. They're all at 6:30.
That's not real helpful. That is one giant campus, folks.
I believe it's the cafeteria. They are usually all in the cafeteria, so we have.
Okay,
tables.
I can find food regardless of the building.
There will be signage, I'm sure.
Brad, you have a question?
Yeah, well, first thing, I unfortunately I won't be able to make the one in Hardwick, so that's unfortunate, but I'm glad you're having one there. Hopefully it's well attended. I just had a quick question I was going to ask you earlier. One quick question. Can you tell me again what the total estimated moose population is in Vermont? And I may have missed that on your slide, but just as an estimated total number of moose.
Yeah, I don't think I did have that in there. I believe our current total statewide estimate is between 18 and 1900, 1800 and something.
Okay.
And
then, okay, and then so the question I was going to ask though is that as we see, I think Maine has, I don't know if it's a lot more funding or grants or what it is, but they do a lot more collaring of calves than I think on a regular basis they do. And as they report out their data, is there any correlation that we can draw here in Vermont based on what they have? I know there's a lot of variables that even though we're in the same kind of range and region, that there's still a lot of variables, but is there anything that we can take from their data and their research relative to the moose population and health of the moose population?
Yeah, I don't know so much about the moose population because our management's very different. So, you know, their population could do one thing and ours might be doing another, but certainly in terms of winter tick impacts, whatever the environmental factors are that drive winter tick abundance from year to year seem to occur at a regional scale. So, you know, if Maine sees a really bad year, we're likely gonna have a worse year also. You know, probably not to the same degree, but you know, we're both gonna go up in the same year and go down in the same year. So we track each other very much in that sense. So we can still learn a lot from Maine. And we do. I mean, we all the three of us moose biologists in New England, we talk regularly. You know, we all have a good relationship. So we definitely share that information, and it is definitely still useful to us. To that point, I'll say also, Maine this year had their lowest tick counts ever at harvest, and they've been doing that since 2006. They had their lowest tick counts on their captured moose that they captured in January. In the 6 years they've been in the unit they're in now, lowest tick counts at capture and the highest body weights at capture. So they're seeing a similar thing to what we're seeing, which is why I suggested earlier that this is more about fluctuations in tick abundance that are, you know, beyond our control. But we also know that they are going to have problems when conditions are favorable for ticks because they have way too many moves for ticks.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you. Thanks. Great as always. And I've seen it evolve over the years, and you've always tackled the questions that come out of the public hearings. And so hopefully the public doesn't have too many questions after you present this to them. Okay. All right, so we're looking for a straw vote by a show of hands. Who here supports the moose plan, hunt plan as presented? Opposed? Guys have it.
Yeah, two opposed.
Two.
So it looked like, unless they were late.
I think they were slow. I think I've been slow. All right, since there's no number 7, moving on to the commissioner's update. Commissioner.
Oh, good evening. So I'll update the board on the budget. And the budget, not great. We have a significant number of upward pressures on our budget, including increased insurance costs, our share of insurance, increased insurance for property. And a lot of that is a result of the flooding in July. Premiums went up, our overhead's going up. So, and that's not to mention that we have our normal COLAs that go on an annual basis. As a result, I've had to do some serious belt tightening, which include cutting some of the equipment out of the warden's budget, cutting vehicles out of every division, and we have proposed the closing of Salisbury Fish Hatchery. It's probably not news to you, but it is. Here are the reasons why. 1, I mentioned the budget. 2, the current discharge permit expires in 2027. And it's best way to phrase it is it's pretty uncertain whether we'll get another discharge permit based on the test results in the effluent at this point, despite our efforts to reduce some of the so-called pollutants. With that in mind, there's one other aspect. We have staff that work down there. And there's a small window right now, bless you, that allows me to move some of them who have qualifications out of fisheries and into the wildlife division, utilizing PR bump funds, which we must start encumbering by August. Don't, we lose them. So we've got a bad choice. We're, you know, the end of the life is probably 2027. Budget's not great, and I have an opportunity to keep these people employed. So that's why I pulled the trigger on it right now. It's not a fun decision. It's not one that we took lightly. So that was included in the budget that the governor presented back in the beginning of the month. Obviously, there's a lot of pushback. A lot of people are making phone calls, but at this point, that's where we stand. So, I'll answer any questions people might want or comments, but I've probably heard them all. Yeah, I am the most popular, well, popular is the wrong word. I'm the most well-known person in the State House right now. Every time I walk in, I hear about this. I understand the issues here. Eric and I are working and his staff on how we pick up the slack. As you may know, Salisbury is the brood stock hatchery, and we would probably be, but we'd have to buy eggs from other places. So that's the story there.
David, do you have a question?
You're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry, I do. I guess it was 2019.
Yes.
Decision was made after a notice that Salisbury would close because it probably could not meet discharge requirements to go ahead, keep Salisbury operating, and during the 5 years of the permit life, and for those of you that don't know, discharge permits only have a life of 5 years. They have to be renewed because there's a standard in the Clean Water Act that you must upgrade to the best available technology when that new permit issues. But anyhow, back in 2019, that was the situation. It was going to continue to operate. And we were assured at that time, we means the legislature, that the agency would in fact be able to bring Salisbury up to meeting requirements for their discharge permit. And I know that you, Commissioner, are not responsible for most of those years when Salisbury was under question, but how do you explain to the legislature that nothing happened in 5 years in terms of?
So David, I would not say that nothing happened. That's not a fair assessment. There's been a lot of work, and so let me fill in the gaps that you've left. In 2019, the angling community agreed to an increase in their licenses. It was $2 on the fishing license and $5 on the combination license. There is a misunderstanding, however, that was the amount needed to keep Salisbury operational, because that only estimated raising about $150,000. I believe there was a $400,000 capital expenditure that the legislature threw at Salisbury to look at how we could improve the water quality, and we've invested that money. And in fact, the staff down there is doing everything they can, vacuuming the raceways and removing the debris from the water to the extent possible. We've reduced the phosphorus from, I think, 500 pounds per annum to 123 is what I believe we heard. So there's been strong efforts to get there. The issue is, despite all that, we're being told by the DEC that the measurement is the macroinvertebrates at the measuring site are not meeting the standard. So while we may meet it with, for instance, total phosphorus, that's irrelevant if we can't have the right macroinvertebrates at the levels that they need. So that's where we are. So I would say that neither my predecessor nor me have done nothing. I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Well, I retract the nothing statement, but we're at, 5 years in, we're at the same point we were in 2019.
We
which,
are in as much
is-
as that we may not get a permit, but I would say that the water quality is better. The reality is that we are 90% of the water that goes into that stream.
At that
And that
point,
makes-
yes.
Yeah, and so I think that's what makes it problematic.
So there's no way to pull this out, sir.
Pardon me?
There's no way to pull this out, pull the rabbit out of the hat and somehow keep Salisbury operating. It has a very unique role within the structure of Fish and Wildlife in that it's brood stock.
Well aware of that, and as I said, this was not an easy decision. And we'll do everything we can, but that's the reality.
Are there any plans to, move some of that capacity to other hatcheries?
Yeah, and Eric is probably best to talk about that, but some of it, yes. But some of we would probably buy eggs for a lot of the strains, especially like brook trout, and raise those in other hatcheries. It's not gonna be a perfect replacement. I can't sit here and tell you there would not be a net loss.
Can there be an addition to another hatchery to?
So, yeah, that's one of the things, and, this is not, I'm not advocating for this at this point, but, Grand Isle Fish Hatchery has more capacity than we can use right now. But the reason you can't use it for inland stocking because it draws all of its water out of Lake Champlain, and we're worried about biosecurity. And so there is some investment, and we're looking at, we had a request for capital study on doing what the enhancement would cost. That got rejected. And so we're still looking at how much money would it cost to essentially put in UV lights and recycling and all sorts of other processes, where then the fish that were raised there could be distributed anywhere in the state and not worry about disease. So the answer is yes, but everything's about money.
Could it be another hatchery in the state?
They're all pretty much, they're running at mostly capacity. We were talking this morning about where we can move it. We can't do what we're doing at Salisbury. So Salisbury is primarily broodstock. They have 40,000 pounds of fish there. Just to get, and let me see if I wrote that down. Ball Hill has 15,000 pounds, but they're at capacity because of the amount of water that they draw. Roxbury's at 30,000 pounds. They have some room for expansion, but not 40,000. Grand Isle is at 50,000, but I mentioned they have some room for expansion, but it's going to require all of that expenditure. And then there are 80,000 at Bennington. Since they have their David?
Yes, has there been any discussion between Vermont and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with the nearly inactive hatchery at Bethel? Since
There has
they are
been.
no longer producing salmon.
There has been some, but it's not anything that I can say is a definite source right now. But the answer is yes, we've talked to them. I can assure you that Eric and Dylan and everyone else who works in fishery and people who don't, John and myself, we have been racking our brains trying to find ways not to have to do this and find ways to solve the problem around it. That's how we understand the significance of this.
Is it an absolute dead stop at the legislature, or is the issue still being discussed?
I think you know the answer to that, David.
I
Nothing's
I
ever a
don't.
dead-
I would not,
Well, nothing's
I
ever a
would not
dead
ask a
stop in
question I
there.
know the answer to.
Nothing's ever a dead stop in that building. Nothing's ever over till it's over. I think some legislators are having discussions because pretty much every one of them talks to me about it. But I can't speak for the legislature.
No, I understand that, but I'm just in terms of having your antenna in the forum. Is it being talked about? And I gather your
Oh, yes,
answer is
it's a
yes,
buzz.
it's still being
Yep.
talked about.
Every time
Is
I go
there-
into a committee, they want to talk to me about Salisbury.
Is there anything that the board can do to help keep Salisbury open? And I'm
Nothing
sorry,
that
I
I
don't mean to
can-
put you on the spot. If you
I live
consider
on
the
the spot.
question,
David,
if you
don't
consider
worry
the
about it.
question and answer later is fine, but
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think you know how this works. It's in my budget, it was included in the budget. And, I don't think the board has a role as a board.
well, that leaves some things unsaid. Thank you, Commissioner.
Did I move on?
Yes.
Well, just a quick
Uh,
question, Commissioner. Relative to the board and in our role in setting limits of take and whatnot, you don't see this having any impact on our current rules, relative to fishing, do you?
No.
Okay.
Okay. So, moving on, I'll just do a quick update on legislature. You've heard some people comment earlier in the meeting about 258. I think everybody on the board here knows maybe they don't know all of it. The bill proposes a reorganization of the Fish and Wildlife Board. If it passes as written, which was modified, John and I went in today to testify at 9, and at 8:30, they revised the entire bill. So I didn't have a lot of time to review it. But they changed the number from 12 to 15. And they added into the bill all of the objections Elcar had to the rule we just made, or you just passed. Except they didn't include the definition of control for hounds, because the second portion of this bill bans hound hunting of coyotes with dogs outright. It also makes it illegal to bait, hunt coyotes over bait. So we testified this morning in opposition to the bill for a number of reasons, including the supposition that the board doesn't represent or consider the views of non-hunters. We find that to be overstated. The board listens to the views of all people who make their voices heard. I pointed out the working group that we set up for rulemaking, which included very vast different groups represented. This meeting, I pointed out that we hear commentary from folks. And I also stated that we can listen, and the board can listen, but not always agree with what people suggest. And so there was some discussion about that. I'm also concerned about the bill expanding the role of the board. And I reminded the Natural Resources Committee that the board has a very narrow function, and that it passed rules with respect to hunting and fishing activities, which the legislature has already deemed to be legal. You're not creating law. You're actually working within a very, very narrow framework. This bill expands that role because it requires rulemaking with respect to non-game activity. So John did a nice job testifying about what we actually do at the department that is beyond hunting and fishing. And it is, with all due respect to the board, a large chunk of what we do, more than actually hunting and fishing. Habitat restoration, habitat acquisition, land management, the WMAs, so on and so forth, endangered species. We have an endangered species committee with what I would call conservation experts, people who are trained in biology, who many of them don't hunt, don't fish. And we also have people who work on the scientific advisory groups, which are subsets of the Endangered Species Committee. And they represent specific areas, like whether it's birds or flora, fish. And I think Catherine told me that they total a number of 80 people. So we have folks from the University of Vermont, the Audubon Society. I can't think of them all, John, but there's a list of people who advise the department and represent a large number of people who do not hunt and fish, but are also experts in wildlife and biology and ecology and conservation. So we pointed that out. And we also talked about the portion around hound hunting. And I reminded the board that that bill was there 2 years ago, and I went in and suggested that we regulate an activity that wasn't previously regulated. And so that's how we came to that bill. That bill was passed by that committee and by the entire General Assembly and signed into law by the governor, requiring this board to make rules, which we did, as a group, and we spent over a year working very hard and diligently coming up with hound hunting for coyotes rules, which just passed in December. And I opened the season on January 1st. And I dare say it was less than 2 weeks into the season that there was a bill to ban the activity. So I suggested that they ought to let this thing run for at least, we spent all this time for what? Why did we even do this if you were just going to ban it? And so I'm really disappointed, and that was the word I used, because I know the amount of time and effort that my staff put in to coming up with recommendations for the board. And the old LCAR process, I don't even want to know how many hours Catherine spent on that. So it's really frustrating. And maybe one of the most telling things about it was they had a discussion about what would happen to the people who were issued permits for this activity. If the bill passed, and the bill would probably pass April or May, just going through the sausage making. And nobody on the committee with jurisdiction, knew that the season that permit was issued for ends in March. Because they're like, well, how do we get, the department will have to pay these people back for their permits if we take this away. And I just was agog that they had no idea that the season would be over before they even finished their activity. So I'm frustrated, and you might be able to tell that in my voice. But I know there were a lot of people, Pat Berry, former commissioner, John Rogers, former senator, Mike Covey, And a number of people have gone in to speak, but there's a lot of people going in supporting it. The one thing I would say to the board, if you want to do something, energize. Make sure your legislature later understands how you feel about this. Because I also made the statement, I think it's incorrect to say that any one of you can't represent the interests of all the people in the state of Vermont because you happen to hunt or fish. I don't think that's a